Okay, this place almost doesn't look real. Today we're spending one full day exploring Dubrovnik, one of the most famous cities on the Croatian coast, and probably one of the most unique old towns I've seen on this trip. You've got giant stone walls, orange rooftops, tiny medieval streets, massive fortresses, and then, literally a few meters away, this insanely blue Adriatic Sea. And if you're looking at this thinking, wait a second, why does this place look familiar? There is a very good reason for that. Game of Thrones fans, welcome to King's Landing. Dubrovnik became one of the main filming locations for King's Landing from the second season onward, with different parts of the Old Town appearing throughout the series. But before we get into all of that, let's actually explore the real city, because Dubrovnik's history is honestly just as crazy as the fictional one. Now I'm in the harbor area, and honestly, I'm already really liking it here. Even from here, you can tell how well this place is maintained. The streets are clean, and even the greenery looks super well taken care of. This whole area definitely deserves a proper tour on its own, but right now, I'm heading to the Old Town, which is about 3 kilometers away. By car, it should take around 10 minutes. Wow, even the drive here is insane. The views are just unreal. Alright guys, we're here. I've already found a pretty amazing spot to go for a swim, but first, I want to head into the Old Town, which is just right across the street. The first thing you notice when approaching Dubrovnik is that the Old Town is basically a fortress. This isn't one of those European cities where you have a random piece of medieval wall left between two apartment buildings. No, the entire historic center is wrapped in fortifications. Dubrovnik's walls run for roughly 1.9 kilometers around the city, with towers, bastions, and fortresses built into the defensive system. And considering how incredibly well preserved everything looks, walking through the entrance feels a little bit like entering a movie set. Except this movie set has been here for hundreds of years. Near the western entrance, you'll probably notice this enormous circular fountain. This is the large Onofrio fountain. And it's not just decorative. It was built as part of Dubrovnik's public water supply system, completed in 1438, which brought fresh spring water into the city. And then you arrive here. This is Stradun, the main street running straight through the Old Town. And I love the contrast. You enter through these intimidating medieval walls. And suddenly, everything opens up into this bright, polished stone street. Almost every building has the same warm stone color. You've got cafes and shops on both sides, church towers in the distance, and all these narrow streets climbing away from the main road. It feels ridiculously cinematic. And the stone pavement has been polished by so many people walking across it over the years that parts of it almost look shiny. This is definitely the busiest part of Dubrovnik, but it's also one of those places where being busy kind of makes sense. Everybody entering the city eventually seems to end up here. Around the eastern side of the Old Town, you start getting some of the city's most impressive buildings. Nearby, you've got Sponza Palace, churches, the Bell Tower, and Orlando's Column. And this is probably where you really start appreciating how much architecture has been packed into such a small area. Gothic, Renaissance, Baroque, medieval fortifications. Here you also have the Rector's Palace. This wasn't just some rich guy's house. It was directly connected to the government of the old Republic of Ragusa, and today it's part of Dubrovnik's Cultural History Museum. Everything is basically stacked together. Part of the reason for that mixture is pretty dramatic. In 1667, Dubrovnik was devastated by a major earthquake. Despite the destruction, the city survived and preserved or rebuilt much of the architecture that gives Dubrovnik its appearance today. And underneath all of this beautiful architecture is a really interesting story. For centuries, Dubrovnik was the center of the Republic of Ragusa, a small maritime republic that became extremely wealthy through trade and diplomacy. It reached its commercial peak during the 15th and 16th centuries and survived between much larger powers for hundreds of years. Basically, imagine being a tiny city-state surrounded by powerful neighbors and somehow deciding, yeah, we're going to become rich merchants instead. And somehow it worked. Ships from Dubrovnik traded across the Mediterranean, and the city became known for its diplomacy and maritime influence. That also explains why so much effort went into protecting this place. If you're rich, surrounded by the sea, and full of valuable goods, you probably want some pretty serious walls. Eventually, after spending so much time surrounded by stone, you come back to the sea. And this might actually be my favorite side of Dubrovnik, because from the old port and the areas around the edge of the historic center, you suddenly understand the geography of this place. The city is incredibly compact. Behind you, medieval walls, churches, and rooftops. In front of you, completely open Adriatic Sea. Boats are constantly coming in and out of the harbor, and just offshore, you can see Lokrum Island. This is exactly why Dubrovnik looks so different from a lot of other historic European cities. The sea isn't just nearby, it's part of the city. The walls literally rise straight above it. Okay, we have avoided it long enough. Let's talk Game of Thrones. Because yes, if you're a fan, you have basically been walking around King's Landing this entire time. Dubrovnik was used extensively for the capital of the Seven Kingdoms, and the producers didn't have to invent as much as you might think. The walls? Real. The giant fortresses? Real. The stone streets? Also real. They obviously added and modified things digitally, but Dubrovnik already had exactly the kind of fortified Mediterranean city they needed. Fort Lovrijenac, that huge fortress sitting on the rock just outside the western walls, was used as the Red Keep in several scenes. The waters and small harbor around this side of Dubrovnik also appear as Blackwater Bay. And Lovrijenac itself is ridiculous. It's built on a rock rising around 37 meters above the sea. Imagine somebody attacking Dubrovnik hundreds of years ago, arriving by boat, looking up at that thing and thinking, you know what? Maybe we go somewhere else. And there is another Game of Thrones location hidden right inside the Old Town. These are the famous Jesuit Stairs. Game of Thrones fans probably recognize them immediately because they were used during Cersei's Walk of Shame. Yes, that scene. So if you're standing here, hearing somebody whisper, "shame," behind you, don't panic. They're probably just a tourist. Probably. And right at the top of the famous Jesuit Stairs, you'll find the beautiful Church of St. Ignatius, overlooking Ruder Bošković Square. It's one of Dubrovnik's most impressive Baroque landmarks, and together with the stairs and the old Jesuit college, it creates one of the most unique corners of the Old Town. Not a bad view after climbing all those steps. And just below the entrance, there's this beautifully maintained little garden sitting right at the foot of Dubrovnik's massive city walls. What's interesting is that this area was originally part of the old defensive moat surrounding the city. Today, of course, it's completely dry and has been transformed into this peaceful green space filled with trees, plants, and perfectly kept lawns. I really like the contrast here. You've got these huge medieval stone walls towering above you, and then this calm, colorful garden right underneath them. And if you keep walking through this little garden and follow the path toward the sea, you eventually reach the area right below Fort Lovrijenac, the same fortress I mentioned earlier that was used as the Red Keep in Game of Thrones. From down here, it looks even more dramatic, towering above the rocks with the Adriatic right in front of you. And what makes this spot even better is that people actually come here to swim right underneath the fortress. So after walking around Dubrovnik all day, I think this is the perfect place to cool off. And yeah, that's exactly what I'm about to do now. After spending a full day here, I think I understand why Dubrovnik became so famous. Of course, the Game of Thrones connection helped introduce this place to millions of people. But Dubrovnik absolutely doesn't need Game of Thrones to be impressive. This city was already doing its own Game of Thrones for hundreds of years. Powerful neighbors, merchant fleets, fortresses, political diplomacy, earthquakes, wars. A tiny republic trying to protect its independence. Honestly, all we're missing is a dragon. And visually, there aren't many places that combine history and landscape this well. You've got this incredibly preserved stone city, surrounded by massive walls, squeezed between the mountains and one of the bluest seas in Europe. Then you walk 5 minutes, and suddenly you're standing beside the Adriatic with a medieval fortress above your head. That's Dubrovnik.